It is 6 p.m. on the dot, and I will call this meeting of the Town of Lunenburg Committee of the Whole to order. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And with that, I will look for a motion to approve our agenda. Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Are there any additions or deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. It takes us on to the Committee of the Whole minutes from February 16th. Can I get a motion to approve those? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Birtles. Are there any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion's carried. That takes us on to the two principal pieces of business we have before us tonight. One is a continuation of our discussion of the 5-year work planning for the Project Lunenburg Comprehensive Community Plan. And I will give an opportunity for staff to, we had a thorough presentation on this the last time, but if there's anything that the CAO would like to add, I'll give an opportunity for that. And just note for councilors that there are also two proposed motions for recommendation to council if they are so inclined. Ms. Renton.
Thanks, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity to offer additional comments, but as you've mentioned...
we can't hear you just now.
Oh, okay.
Heather's working with the tech.
Okay.
Okay. We good now?
Are you able to hear me, Your Worship?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I think I started talking too quickly before I unmuted myself. So thank you for that opportunity, Your Worship. As you had mentioned, we've done quite a thorough review at the previous meeting. We're more than pleased to dig into any of the components of the Gantt charts that staff have prepared, either in the consolidated form, which is the one-pager of all 35 items, and you'll recall that those are color-coded, the green indicating those items that are actively in progress. And thank you. I should give Heather a moment to bring that up. And the various shades of green as are depicted in the image that you see before you indicate the various phases or steps to implementation that are set out in the original comprehensive community plan document itself. And some of those span a 5-year time horizon as further indicated. The yellow shading are projects that may require some preconditions. It could be legislative in nature, financial in nature, or other prior requirements before we can actively initiate some of those. That would include even completion of the planning documents that is part of Project Lunenburg, and Ms. Sutherland could speak further to that. So that is the consolidation of the 35 individual sheets. And maybe Heather, if you wanted to bring up one of those. That of course have more detail in them. And as I say, we have all managers either physically in attendance, Your Worship, as you well know, or available via Zoom to comment on any of these action items. And take any questions of council. Otherwise, we would recommend to you the two motions that have been put before you for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Renton. Let's give Heather a moment here to get rid of the echo. Thank you, Heather. Is there any council discussion on the Gantt charts and the 5-year work planning? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank staff for all of the great work. I can't imagine the time that it's taken to be able to pull all of these together. As we're trying to make decisions and plan and look forward, I still am struggling with, under community structure, under number 10 with site planning for Blockhouse Hill. and under 13, the housing and feasibility study, and under 25, the housing, so the study policy actions towards alternative housing models, why those are so pushed out so far and require additional funding. So I'm wondering if we could take some time and perhaps discuss that a little further. And to Deputy Mayor Mosier's point, I think it was at last council meeting, I think it would be of a benefit for us to be able to sit down with the planner and understand right from today what it would take, what are all the steps that it would take, and the timelines in which those steps would happen to get a shovel in Blockhouse Hill. I think that was a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put you on the list, Councillor Duggan. I just, because the planner is the lead on, I believe, all three of those, I just wanted to give some space for the planner to respond to Councillor Sanford. Dawn, are you there?
Try again, Dawn. She's not saying anything, so I can't tell if she's there.
She's speaking.
I'm showing everything on.
Can you hear me now, Heather?
Yes.
Yeah. Must have been my headset. Sorry. And I don't have all I have is my little sheet. So, God, I can't read this. So I would have to go right into the Gantt charts and look at all the different steps because I don't have them here in front of me, and I'm afraid if I take this down, you'll lose me again. That's what I was trying to do. So through the mayor, if the chair of PAC, Councillor Sanford, if she would like to meet with me, we could go through these in detail, certainly. You know, there's a number of steps in each one. Did you want me to go through them now?
Well, I think Councillor Sanford's,
I can't hear
I
you.
think,
I've got it muted again.
okay, thanks. Dawn, I think Councillor Sanford's question was just in reference to.
You got too
timelines,
much of an
but
echo.
she
I
can
can't
weigh
hear
in
you.
And correct me if I'm wrong. She just, I don't think we need details. We just need to know how quickly can some of these things be accomplished.
And I don't think it's just be specific. I suspect there are the other councillors nodding their heads.
I don't know what she asked me.
So the question was specifically in reference to how quickly some of these housing initiatives be accomplished.
No. All I can hear is just garbly. It's just all I can hear is echoes.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
It,
Dawn,
just hang on.
Weird.
how about now? You can hear me now. Okay, so Councillor Sanford's question was in reference to how quickly some of the housing initiatives can be accomplished.
So I hope you can hear me now. So some of them we've actually, Councillor Duggan and I have started the conversation today on housing that is affordable. We met with the representatives of Shack. So we're starting them now. A lot of this will depend on budget approval as well, right? So if I start an archaeology start archaeology on Blockhouse Hill, I'd need that to go through budget. So I do have to wait for some of this to go through budget, but we have, we've had a preliminary discussion with the campground, and we've started on housing that is affordable. So after that, and so we met with them, the rezoning, that would come out of the land use bylaw, the MPS and the LUB, so that we will have in place by the end of the year. That's all I can see. That's all I can see, Heather. Okay, feasibility study. So again, you can stop now. Okay, so a feasibility study, we have some money in the budget for that. And again, that's going to be part of the conversations with affordable housing with our partners, so building partners. And the master planning study, that is actually going to have to wait till after the MPS and the LUB, because we need to have our policies and our regulations in place. No, it could be anything, but it goes phase 1, 2, 3, 4. But something like the desktop, the archaeology, we could start as soon as we got funding of the budget. So there, I know it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, but we can come in and start things at different times, so that, we don't have to wait till 4.7 to start a design process. We can start it, as soon as we get some other things in place. But a lot for Blockhouse Hill does depend on our MPS and LUB, so our planning documents.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Sanford?
Not quite. So I would expect to see green in this, for it not to be yellow. So I guess that's what concerns me, is I'm thinking, are we delaying getting started? But when I hear Ms. Sutherland explain, I think things are starting, but I don't feel that this chart reflects it. So it makes me nervous when I see yellow all the way across to 2024, thinking, okay, what are we doing in the meantime? So.
Yeah, I think some of the yellow, and Dawn, please weigh in to correct me here, but is indicative of legislative changes related to the MPS and the LUB, is that correct?
That's right.
So when the yellow indicates legislative changes required, it's changes to our own municipal legislation through the bylaws.
And so I think what's throwing me is when it says startup is dependent on, but what I'm hearing from Dawn is startup is happening. So it's not,
So I think,
some aspects aren't dependent on funding, other aspects are. Is that what I'm understanding?
so I think what this is dependent on is changes to our own legislative framework in terms of the zoning of Blockhouse Hill right now. And what Dawn is saying is that there are preliminary steps that can be taken while we're waiting for that to go through.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's correct, Dawn, yeah?
Through the mayor, Councillor Sanford, I'm having a really difficult time hearing anybody. It's really echoey, so maybe I'll have to talk to you tomorrow if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. That's fine.
Or bring it back to another council. I'm sorry, I really can't hear you.
My only concern is, I don't have a problem with that. I'm just concerned about the other councilors if they have questions and want to be part of the conversation.
Okay, Councillor Doug?
So I, completely agree with Councillor Sanford that this is something that needs to be prioritized and moved ahead faster. I did meet with Dawn and Nancy and Helen from SHAC today. The meeting went well, and we're going to meet again in the not too distant distant future to sort of explore a bunch of different things that we can be doing. So that's a positive. I do agree that I would love to have a sit down with Dawn, and I think that should be an entire council sit down where we do discuss the steps, because I myself don't understand them completely either. So I think that that would be incredibly beneficial to have, even if it's just a short meeting, to lay out the steps of what needs to be done and what we can be doing in the meantime to sort of fill the gaps in order to get this going as quickly as possible. That is something that I want to see as well.
So might I suggest then that we put a fuller presentation on a future committee of the whole agenda on this? Okay. Is there any further discussion councillors have about this evening? Or for further questions? Okay. Councillor Halverson?
Say, if I might suggest to Dawn, she may want to just, I know it's ridiculous, but log off and log on. It might be a problem just with her connection on her end if she wants to rejoin in.
We'll leave that with staff.
Your worship, we
Are there
can
any
hear
further
yourself.
comments or questions related to the Gantt chart process here? Nobody else has any? I have one myself, if it's okay, and it's related to number 32, cultural and recreation, assess arts and recreation facility needs and develop a plan. I'm seeing there, and I'll punt it to you, Ms. Renton, for a start, that the lead department is PD and Rec. And by PD, I assume that means planning department. It seems to throughout the document. But then the lead staff are the recreation director and the facility superintendent. So I'm just wondering, that to me seems a very urban planning thing. So I'm just wondering, is the planner going to be a co-lead, or is the department a co-lead, or is that supposed to be public works? I'm just not quite understanding that.
Your worship, that item number again was?
32.
I might not be the best person to speak to that, your worship. It's not one that I specifically worked on. I think that, though, that being said, there's flexibility in all of these action items. I was working on several today that are, in fact, public works designated items for being the main point of contact, but that's not to say that others such as myself might not work within one of the action items. So yeah, sorry, Heather, are you bringing that up there? That would be super if you did. Thank you. So, and Heather, if you just go over to the leads on the right-hand side of the page, just scroll over, please. Right. Yeah, so I think these are interdepartmental. There'll be, a variety of staff members that'll be working on these projects. I know this is an area that Heather as well has been working on. So it's not to the exclusion of any individual staff member. It's just to indicate who the key leaders of that field are going to be. Does that answer your question, your worship? So for instance, I may pull in on action items that are identified as CAO principal leads. I may pull in many other employees on that to assist me, and they know that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. What I'm trying to ascertain is that seems to me primarily an urban plan, or like to develop a master plan in the long run for that space seems primarily an urban planning kind of conversation. So my question was, I'm seeing the planning department as a lead department, but not the planner as a lead, a co-lead from the staff perspective. And I didn't know if the intent was to get an external consultant there potentially, or, it just seemed odd not to have planning more involved from the departmental perspective. So I just wanted to ascertain that.
Right. I might have to pitch that question to someone else, your worship, who may know better about how they thought that would be carried out. And clearly there is an indication there's an RFP and, you know, additional resources that would be needed.
Thanks. The facility superintendent wants to weigh in.
Thank you, Worship. I just want to point out that the phase 1 is submit a RFP for planning and design services that include community consultation and development of recreation needs assessment. So it would, to me, it would be, yeah, out to RFP for a consultant. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if Dawn's still with us, and at the risk of inciting technical difficulties, give her an opportunity to weigh in.
Okay. Is it any better?
Can't hear you, Dawn.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Now you can hear me. Okay. So I would be working with the recreation director on this. I believe it's going to an RFP for planning services, but we would still have to work together on that because there's different aspects. There's the landscaping plan as well, like the urban design plan would have to be taken into account in this as well, and the linkages with trails, as well as there's a community component because we want to have it as multi-use space and not just recreation, but leisure, cultural and arts and those types of things as well. So my understanding is an RFP, but I would be involved with the recreation director as well.
Okay, thanks for that. I'd suggest then that we add the planner as a co-lead on that, but I'll leave that with staff. Anything further? Councillor Halverson?
Yeah, I just wanted to address, there's a number of items here where I'm looking at, and it seems that we're always waiting on consultants' reports. And I get it, we want to get the best information we can, but I'm also, you know, I've done a back of the napkin calculation, but we're spending a lot of money on consultants. You know, is that entirely necessary?
See if Ms. Renton wants to weigh in on that.
I think in the fullness of time, can you hear me, Your Worship? Just make sure. In the fullness of time, Your Worship, I think we'll know better about that. Many of these components were identified in Upland's comprehensive community plan that there would be outsourcing of some of the project components. So we've reflected that in these action items and the Gantt charts, but we may come to find that through our own in-house capabilities and or financial restrictions that we just simply cannot or do not need to find outside consultants to assist us with that. So I think we'll evolve with that process as time goes on. You know, in some ways, probably the consultants from Uplands were trying to help us to realize that we have a small staff resource team, being just 30 people with less than 9 managers, and that you know, it may very well be necessary to hire outside expertise. But I think, as I said, in the fullness of time, I'm sure there'll be more items that we'll be able to do on our own.
Thank you, Ms. Renton. Yeah, I'd also note that a lot of this is project-based work, which tends to, you know, be assisted by consultants. This isn't day in and day out work. And given that the comprehensive community plan itself was generated primarily by consultants, I don't, you know, I take your point that some organizations overuse consultants. Don't know that we do, but I think a lot of this work, I worry about this work then being done off the corner of somebody's desk while they're trying to do day in and day out priorities, because that also hasn't always worked to our advantage in the past.
Now, for all the reasons you just mentioned, I just wanted to bring it up because it is, when we start looking at all the line items and we start adding that up, an awful lot of money, right? But, and again, I have no issue. I'd rather spend the money up front to make sure we're going to get it right in the long run. Things like wastewater treatment plant and development plans obviously make sense.
Yeah, no, but I appreciate your comment. Any further discussion?
I would actually like to ask the CAO where we are on the organizational review. I see there is, there's a timeline here, but it seems to extend quite far into the future. I'm wondering, is there any, where are we on that? And can we, I want to be able to make sure, we're 4 months into our term already. We've got a 4-year term here, and I want to make sure we've got metrics to know, are we meeting goals?
Well, it's another good question. Your worship, there is a couple of different options. And again, we've looked at it from a perspective of what can we do internally. So we have costed out some different scenarios for fairly significant reorganization based on some recommendations of other communities that have perhaps a fuller, what I think is referred to as a community development department. The costing for that can be quite staggering. There were a significant number of staffing positions that would be necessary to fully staff that in a model that we thought could initially, let's say, mirror some other organizations, municipal organizations, where they have a larger department that would be more focused on some of the components of the CCP implementation you've talked about tonight. We were looking at cost projections of over $600,000 to do that. So that's just a very preliminary internal review. So what we've endeavored to do is to look at some preliminary and immediate phase-in of organizational components and requirements that we see as staff that will be included in the draft 21-22 budget. 2 positions in particular that we'll talk to you more about on March 16th that we're just starting to develop, but would be focused on planning and development and economic development more generally. We also have included in the budget monies, in the draft budget, I should say, monies for a possible request for proposals for consulting services for an external organization review, perhaps using some of the documentation we've prepared thus far and suggestions that we have for you at the upcoming session. That is in the current document that Uplands provided, cost projection of upwards to $100,000, and that's reflected in the draft budgets that our finance team are working on now. So obviously some very significant cost considerations for implementing this component. So we might have to take a look at it from various angles about, again, about what can we do possibly in-house to try and reduce those costs and put people in needed positions to facilitate the implementation of CCP. And yet, is it necessary to do a full-on external review? And if so, how will we best finance that? So I know my finance colleagues will have more to say about that at your next session.
I think that satisfies your question,
thank you.
Councillor Halverson. Deputy Mayor?
Just like one comment that I'm kind of getting out of the discussion we're having here is that, the function of the planning department. And while I've been on council, how little attention this department has had. And it amazes me, how the town has, been successful. It has a pretty logical layout, over the years without any real professional view over that. So then, like, moving forward, it's important, that we use the CPP to draw this out. And now the spotlight is going to be on our planning department, which is good. And that's, I think, what goes right back to the original what Councilor Sanford is saying, that, we need some workshops, I think, with Dawn. We really got to get in her head and understand this function a little better than perhaps we do. And that might relieve some of the anxiety we have, like, for these projects moving forward.
Well, and I think a lot of that will come out in the budget discussions as well as resources get allocated. Any further discussion from councilors on this? All right. Well, I think that discussion was very helpful. There are two motions presented. I think we could, as we've talked about before, quibble for 6 months about what comes where, but I think giving a broad and general direction, which is of course contingent on a number of things to staff, would be helpful at this stage if it was council's pleasure to do so. So I will see if it's anybody's pleasure to move to recommend the two motions to council. Councillor Duggan, is that a motion? Okay. So moved. Deputy Mayor, seconded. Is there any discussion or debate on the motion? Councillor Alverson?
I just want to be clear that what we're voting on here is is a prioritized list. So this is going to proceed as it's laid out.
Well, I think what we'd be giving direction on is the work planning as presented. The list would certainly be prioritized, but I think that everybody understands council's desire and urgency to get these directions on the move. I think the scoring process did list a prioritization, but I don't think that prohibits things from getting done that aren't prioritized more highly, if that makes sense.
I just want to make sure that, that when I'm looking down the list here and, to Councillor Sanford's point, housing is at number 17 of a 35 item list. It doesn't really seem to indicate that if, you've got an extra, some extra time to allocate to something, where am I going to put that? Am I going to put it into something that's kind of a middle of the road item, or am I going to knock that into community structure, the site planning for block, one of those things. So I just want to make sure that, again, housing concerns and priorities are set and are recognized throughout the day-to-day working of staff.
Okay,
And I know we're talking about a 5-year plan. I mean, are we going to set, along with this, what I'd like to know is, what is the action plan if we pass this motion tonight from the CAO? What's the action plan as far as moving into the departments and setting the priorities for departments and setting workflow?
Yeah, so if you'll notice on the draft motion, there is direction as part of the
Right.
draft motion to create an annual plan for each of the 5 years. And so I think we would begin that process alongside the budget of having an annual work plan in terms of what was going to be done for this year, and then continue to do that over the course of the 5 years so that we know what's coming up in each year.
Okay.
And I take your point on prioritization. I just worry we could spend
Sure.
6 months reprioritizing these and get no further ahead.
Yeah.
Like spend time prioritizing and reprioritizing them when we could be working on them.
And again, as we discussed, there are some things here that we can be working along with other priorities. But again, I just want to make sure that there's we do have that plan, that 5-year plan does envelop all 35, not just the top 10 priorities.
I think everybody's aware of, I certainly am aware of that, and I think everybody else is aware of that. I'll give Ms. Renton a chance to weigh in. I think she'll say that a lot of these are already being worked on.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. That being said, though, the housing workshop that you're talking about, and I think it would be helpful, the mayor and deputy mayor and I have talked about perhaps a focused orientation session on that to look at what resources and tools we have available right now, what investments we've currently made in housing, and then how to look forward to that implementation plan that's laid out before you in the various action items, and how best to integrate that in the budget and maybe, make that a higher budget priority, because as you'll see, there are significant dollars that are attached to many of the housing components because they require, real physical studies to be done of various components of phasing in that development. And I think that'll be a really positive budget session to focus on some of those components, because I'm getting a strong sense that you'll want to move them up significantly in the capital prioritization that's included in the draft 21-22 budget that'll be before you on the 16th.
Councillor Sanford?
So I agree with Councillor Halverson's concerns with regards to what exactly is it that we're voting on. So if I think that we're voting on a 5-year plan, and as I look at it right now, excuse me, and because I'm focused just at this particular time on housing and have been asking questions with regards to Blockhouse Hill, I'm not really comfortable at this point. When I look at that breakdown of that Gantt chart and the phase 1, not understanding or having had any conversations to better understand from the planner's perspective, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that. So I don't know that I can sit here and vote on passing a 5-year plan without that missing information from the planner that I think we were all asking for.
Okay. I appreciate the comment. I will note, though, just from a procedural perspective, it has been moved and seconded. So for council to dispose of this motion, the moving to defer is an option, or moving to amend is an option. But we have to deal with this in some fashion. Councillor Duggan?
I mean, the reality of the situation is that not everything can be prioritized at, number 1 through 5. I guess, what we're looking for, I think, is just not necessarily a change in the numbers on here. It's listed how it is, and we're not going to go through changing all of it, but a commitment that we're going to have the knowledge that we need moving forward, and to sort of move the priorities ahead despite what number they're at, if that makes sense. So it doesn't matter if it's number 5 or it's number 20. What can we be working on together to sort of move everything along to meet the goal at the end?
Okay. Councillor Bertels and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have the same concerns as Councillor Stanford. I just want to understand that in the second motion there, it says the annual work plan. So if we approve this or pass it this evening, every year we're basically going to come back and revisit it, and we can rediscuss it and say, okay, housing hasn't been touched. We have to touch it again, or talk about it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess if I summarize what Councilor Duggan says, it's like, I see all these 35 things going in a basket, and they're all going to be done at the end of 5 years, whether, 1 gets done first or 10 gets done first. They're all going to get done. That's the objective, right? So I'm comfortable with them, or in the whatever order's there, but I am also diligent that they'll all get done.
And we know what you can do when you set your mind to something. I'd also point out, and I know I've raised this issue before, and I think the housing workshop would be useful, because I think that the most effective, a lot of how we deal with the housing issue is indirect, in the sense that the 2 biggest things that we could probably do to help alleviate the housing problem in this town are to pass the new land use bylaw and to deal with sewage treatment and the capacity of the plant, because that represents a potential servicing bottleneck that would make it prohibitive to develop new housing. I know that seems counterintuitive, but it's actually probably, like, from a strategic perspective, those are the 2 big ticket items that could probably do the most good on that score. Not the only things, it's a big and complex problem, but I just want to note that the reason I raise that is because the sewage treatment plant issues are 1 and 2, but they affect the housing issue in a major way, potentially, and our capacity for growth in a major way. So that also has to be weighed in the balance. Just because something has housing next to it doesn't mean that it's how we're going to fix, it's the only thing we need to do to fix our housing issue as much as we can, if that makes sense for councilors. But I appreciate the concerns about making sure we get all 35 done and revisiting things on an annual planning basis. So is there any further discussion on the motion? Would anybody like to move to defer this, or are we ready to vote? All right, it has been moved and seconded. There is no further discussion. The two motions as are listed. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. That takes care of that piece of business, and per direction, I'm sure staff will begin to produce an annual work plan for this year in conjunction with the budget. Speaking of which, oh, that was a good segue. I should be on stage. Update regarding preparation of the 2021-22 organizational financial plan, incorporating comprehensive community plan action items for presentation on March 16th. So I believe that's just a staff update, and I don't know, Ms. Renton, is it you or Ms. Dagley who's providing that? You? Oh, okay, take it away.
I guess it's fairly brief, Your Worship. It was just to note that there is the upcoming meeting on March 16th, where we will, oh, I think I turned. Okay. That staff are working at, all the managers are working on the budget, and we're working at a plan, a presentation for council that shows how it ties into the CCP, and that there'll be lots of information to digest that evening for sure.
Okay, and we'll look forward to diving into that, I'm sure. Everybody always loves budget season. All right. So there is no new business tonight. Our next meeting date will be March 16th. I've taken the action item of bringing forward a presentation from the planner at a future committee of the whole meeting. I don't know if that'll be pulled together for the 16th, but probably shortly thereafter. Our next meeting date is on the 16th at 6 p.m. and there being no further business, we stand adjourned.